name is Natalie Weinstein. I'm your host for today. The name of the show is called The Generation Connection, the show that explores change and the power of youth and present-day professionals working together. And today I have two very exciting professionals with me, and the title of this show is called Intergenerational Transition. That's sort of a mouthful, but I think you guys can handle it. With me today is Stuart Revo, who is an attorney and then some, and we're going to talk about your checkered past momentarily, and Richard Stark, who is a certified public accountant and financial planner and lifestyle organizer, if you will. And I want to thank you both for being on the show with me today, because one of the most important things I think we have to address in today's world as professionals is what's going to happen in the future when we may not be around to steer the ship as we're doing these days, but who are able to play a role in mentoring, if you will, and assisting the next generation in taking the lead. So, Stu, first of all, let's talk a little bit about you. In addition to the fact that you are an attorney, what other professions have you been involved with?
Well, Natalie, I hardly know where to start, but after practicing law in the Middle East, living in Kuwait, where I was the first American lawyer to practice with a private Middle Eastern firm, I moved to the Dutch Antilles, and I was a wet barrel crude oil trader for a while, going all around the world. And I did sign a contract with a newly developed member of OPEC, Cameroon, to buy oil when they first discovered oil, and resold that at a profit. I took that money and started buying minor league baseball teams, and I was very briefly at the top of the minor league baseball world, and then sold that to a bunch of investors. And
I hope you didn't have anything to do with the Yankees' loss in the past few years, because that's made me very upset.
I'm solely responsible for it since I root for the Indians. But
Oh, okay.
I thought I'd retire to a quiet existence in Vermont. My wife was pregnant with my youngest child, so we moved up to Manchester, which of course is where I met Richard. And I bought an art gallery, expanded it so that I owned 3 at that point. And then I thought, well, maybe I'm not quite done yet. So I took the bar exam again at a rather advanced age. And now I have a business practice in both Vermont and New York. And I shuttle back and forth between the two.
That alone speaks volumes to the youth of today, without saying another word. To have had those interesting and varied professions over the course of not that long a lifetime is it is about change, I guess. And what is transition if not change?
It's anything but the orthodox career ladder. It's more like a game of chutes and ladders.
Now, Richard.
Yes.
You are a gentleman who has reinvented the art, skill, and purpose of being a person's go-to for anything that has to do with business and business development today as an accountant. How has your profession changed over the course of the last few years?
Well, I think you've had a very dramatic change in the way business operates. Today's business has to operate on the premise that change is inevitable, change is the norm, and the only thing that is constant is change. What I have found is that most businesses operate in the past today, and what you have to do is bring business people to understand that the way that you're going to go forward and adapt is to be able to collaborate with other entities, effectively be in the world where businesses collaborate. I think that's also a link to the young people of today, because the young people of today are used to collaboration through social media. They don't have the ability to acquire or spend large sums of money to have something that's fixed. Businesses that are fixed, it is very difficult in an internet world where you have transparency and no real advantage. A person that's in Europe or in any other country has the ability to interact directly with a consumer in the United States. What I find very interesting, perhaps, is that businesses are slow to realize this change. The younger generation, among them, the generation that's moving up, the millennials, the 20-year-olds, react very differently to this than does the 50, the 60-year-olds. The 50 and 60-year-olds pretty much have been grown up with a model of the past, a model where the internet did not take place, a model where the world was not interconnected, a model where you had proprietary edge by knowledge of something that was different. That has been leveled today. You have an impatience in business. You have a level of I want things now. You have a level of I can acquire things everywhere immediately. In the retail world, you have my clients have the needs that things be shipped not only in 24 hours, but today. Okay, you have the restructuring of where a business has to be located to deal with that. You have a manufacturing business. Manufacturing can be done anywhere in the world. I think those are some of the attributes of today. And I think what it is the need for business to be adaptable, to be ready for change, to be creative, and to be practical in their approach.
Stu, there was a term that Richard mentioned I want to talk to you about as an attorney from a legal standpoint, and that's the word transparency. How does that affect the world of today differently than, let's say, 10 or 20 years ago, when that word did not come up in conversation as often as it does now?
Well, that's a really good question. And it has its pluses and its minuses. The transparency is great because the information is a lot easier to gain. But from a legal standpoint, it has brought intellectual property and protecting the value of intellectual property to the forefront. Because if he has a brilliant idea, he wants to be sure that he can protect it and monetize it before somebody else can take it right off the internet and do it better or sooner than he does.
That's a challenge today, even for young people who have a germ or a kernel of an idea and don't have the stability of an existing business or relationships and networks that maybe some of us who are more experienced in our professions have today. I imagine that's just one of the challenges that young people have today in a world of such transparency and technology moving so quickly and demands on everything happening so quickly. How do you feel about that?
Well, it creates good opportunities for legal work for me.
That's very true. And I think that's a part of the business of doing business today, is to make sure that you are protected legally. Years ago, you might say, well, we can get this done with a handshake. How do you feel about the fact that handshakes today just don't cut it anymore?
Well, I think it's sad, but it's true. And especially in the case of a brilliant young person with a great idea. He's entering a world where there are companies that are perfectly willing to lawyer up, steal his idea, allow themselves to be sued, and basically take the value of his idea. So, and most young people are not thinking in terms of how do I protect my idea. They're just thinking about, let's get my business started, let's make a lot of money. And they can't afford a big law firm. So,
A difficult challenge. I want to talk about the transition of generations for a moment. What you've seen in business, what you've seen in terms of how to create that partnership of father and son, mother and daughter, even grandparent and grandchild, to protect them both legally and still keep the family relationship on the proper balance. First, you, Richard, talk about what you've seen in your practices where you have family businesses.
So what you find is most interesting, I guess, in a family business is that you have a divergence of what I would call the way the generations deal with each other. I guess pretty much has not changed within probably my career, has been the perception of the older generation that the younger generation knows very little, and the perception of the younger generation saying that the older generation knows just as little. And
The dinosaur theory.
Well, the dinosaur theory. And what happens is you have a vast disconnect between the two generations communicating with one another. The reality of the situation is you actually need almost a transition between the generations, and similar to what you would do in real estate, where you have someone brokering a deal or someone in law lawyering a deal, you need someone to really interconnect the two generations. Because what really happens is that the young people, the people who are coming up in our intergenerational bias or intergenerational path, have views of how they perceive the world to be in the future. They are operating the latest methods that they have. They have gone to the best schools. They have the best professors. They have traveled around the world. We have a very interconnected world. When we were growing up, we used to be pretty much a U.S.-based company or a U.S.-based economy. We are now a world economy. There is no distinction between U.S. and anywhere else, and I think that perception has to be there. The older generation has not been really fully dealing with that. The other thing that you have is you have the young generation communicates through social media, through texting, through tweeting, through other things. The generation that's above them doesn't do it that way. And so you have a communication disparity between the two. I think what happens is that if you, in succession planning, one of the goals is to be able to have the generations communicate with one another, where the older generation becomes the mentor for the younger generation, and the younger generation becomes the student, and because of that interconnect, you are able to really move forward. The older generation has knowledge of life experience. The younger generation has experience of youth and exuberance. They don't know what they don't know yet. They believe they know, but they also look to the older generation to be able to help them avoid some of those avenues. And that's what happens if you're successful.
So now comes the plan. How do you put that kind of plan into place where both parties are protected and where the element of mutual respect is protected?
Well, let's start with the second part of your question, which not unexpectedly is a great question, because while Richard says that this will work if the older generation are mentors and the younger generation, they're the students, I think it's much more mutual, reciprocal, and equal. I stand in awe of the younger generation. I'm grateful for how much they have to teach us and how much they can help us. And the only way that we can avoid becoming dinosaurs is to learn from them.
Get on the train.
And to work with them. Get on the train or you're completely irrelevant.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that our contemporaries will be successful business people, professionals, lawyers, accountants, to the extent they embrace this very capable younger generation. And when they see us embrace it, they will want to work with us and will be able to succeed in that way. And then, so if you have the right attitude, then the contract will fall into place. And that's what I do professionally, is I try to look down the road and see what are the pitfalls that the parties themselves can envision, but it's my job to foresee. And usually it's easing the transition, easing the shift, easing the control from the older generation to the younger.
Richard, do you want to comment on that?
Yes. I think that what I have seen also is, having working with two generations within many different businesses, one of the focuses I've always had was going and actually understanding what were the goals and the aspirations of the younger generation. And what do they find is the future of the business as they view it, and then being able to really look at the business as it exists today with the way that their parents and perhaps are running the business, and then saying what can change. Actually, then going to the generation in charge and saying, maybe this would work, and becoming kind of the translator or the communicator for the younger generation. What you do there is they actually get a kick out of that, because what you've done is you've actually come down and someone has actually wanted to understand them and be part of them and move them forward. And that is probably one of the most successful ways of communicating between generations.
I want to share a little story with you both. As an interior designer for many years, I've developed a whole network of sources. And one of them is a local lighting store that I used for many years. I just happened to, when I was teaching at the Institute for Interior Design, use them as a source and brought my students there. And over the years, we've done many seminars there. To that end, my contemporary's father, who was then probably about 85, was still involved in the company to some degree. Maybe just on a cursory level, because he really didn't do much, but he was given the respect of his own office, even though he didn't really do much in the office. And the son was the one who sort of took the reins away from Dad, slowly but surely. But the method of doing business between those two generations was pretty much the same. Now, a few years ago, maybe 5 or 6, I would say, the third generation came into the business. And Michael, unlike his father, who was my contemporary, had another whole frame of reference, one in which he was computer savvy, marketing savvy. He knew about Twitter, Facebook, all the things that I still struggle to logisticate. Thank goodness I have staff who's really smart and who does that, but I'm not the one that's doing it all the time. And now came the clash of the titans, so to speak. Dad, who ran this successful company for almost 40 years, and son, who came in with all these new ideas on how to change the redesign of the space, how to change where you purchase the products, how to go and market a website. And so, clash it was. What happened during that time of, and I think it's a period of transition, really and truly it is, where they had to get in the groove together. They just couldn't come in and hit the ground running. Son wanted to change everything. Father wanted to change nothing. Why change it? It's been successful all these years. And I think this is common in many cases where you have a successful business transitioning into the new era, if you will.
Probably most businesses. And it is a rare business, really, is that the transition is easy. Okay. And what's interesting is that all of us send our kids to the best colleges to learn the best methods, to do the most up-to-date things. And then when the kids come back from college and they get into the business with the best methods and the best ways, now we have resistance. Because the natural inclination of people is to be resistant to change. And business owners and dad and the mom or whoever's the generation in charge has that resistance. Most people don't embrace change. In a new world, the only thing that you can do is deal with change. Change is happening at a almost galactic speed. In other words, change happens every year, every 6 months. The business that I had as an accountant 2 years ago has changed in New York. I've become more of a regulations person. More of government has been shifted onto accountants. If you don't adapt to that, you will become extinct as a professional, as a business. Change is something that we have to deal with all the time. And I think that all the generations are going to have to adapt to the change, and really embracing what the change is of youth will enable both generations to move forward and really be successful in the new world.
I'll share the PS to that story now. Now we'll fast forward about 2 years down the road, and Dad is still there doing what he does best. He's communicating with his old networking cronies to get the best prices, and with the builders that he knew to get the deals where he can do the model homes. And Michael is involved now in creating a brand new website, a new marketing approach, and a new sales slogan. the two of them pretty much stay out of each other's way. He has one area of expertise, he has another area of expertise. The business is thriving. Dad is now taking more vacations, which doesn't make the son unhappy. And the son doesn't have to work all the time, so he can spend time with his wife and his children. How they got there was a serious process. But I think that in any business today, whether it's one that's intergenerational within families or mentoring from someone older who's interested in now slowing down or taking in a junior partner, we have the same issues. And I think, Stu, I'd like to speak to you about that for a moment in terms of creating fair and equitable partnerships in these cases. How does one do that? It must be very difficult.
Well, even the term partnership is highly charged. I mean, it's the most difficult form of business entity. And I know I keep coming back to the non-legal aspect, the personalities, the psychology. I can draft such a wonderful document for you that anticipates everything, but if the personalities don't work, if the people can't work together, it's going to fall apart, and it's going to be litigation, not business law.
Well,
That's a problem.
but it's interesting. It's interesting, and we talk about it in terms of generation, intergenerational. It's really the same thing in partners in the same generation, and people who you're going into business with in the same generation. If you're both going to be in each other's territory, and you mentioned before the transition, and one did web and the other one did something else, if you have any partnership or any group of corporations, if one person does sales, another person does administration, another part does marketing, another person does this, chances are you're going to be more successful because no one is in anyone else's territory. So I think the concept that you have there between parent and child is that each one was doing something different, which enabled it to become more successful than it would otherwise be.
Very well taken. Point well taken. You know, as a person who has been a single owner of a company for over 40 years, I've been involved in training and mentoring many different types of people in business and also in the field of interior design, young people today, who come with a whole different set of skills than I have. Yet the one commonality between us is the need for communication. And I think that need for communication is the reason why we have failures and breakups in partnerships, in marriages, in intergenerational speaking, just in a family. All of this communication seems to have taken a backseat to texting, internet connections. We don't speak to one another anymore. I was listening on the radio the other day to a restaurant that opened up in Manhattan that's highly successful today because the woman did not permit anyone to use a cell phone in the restaurant. She had a big pot on the table, and when you came in, if you were not willing to put your cell phone in the center of the table and talk to one another, you could not have a table. Think about that the seriousness of our situation is not so much that we can't transitions between generations, we can't talk to each other anymore.
What's also very interesting, and I know we talk about communications that is in emails and texts and Twitters and tweets and everything else is very direct. One of the things that we've lost the ability to see is the inflections, what the person meant, the eye contact, the movement, the idea of what they're really saying, as opposed to what it says, and the potential for misinterpretation, the potential for it being heard different than the way it was sent is extremely great.
To go back to your question about the difficulty of family partnerships, when I draft documents in that situation, I try to draft in a shared and somewhat lengthened decision-making process so that you give the parties the encouragement and, more importantly, the time
A period of adjustment.
to resolve their differences, so that you do everything possible in the documents to avoid the situation that the law calls the deadlock. But again, as you both have emphasized, it comes down to communication. And if parties, in the end, can't resolve a serious dispute, that's when companies are sold or dissolved.
And that's unfortunate because sometimes they are talented people, but we haven't learned how to logisticate that coming together period in a way which is not adversarial. Territories are, people call, well, we have territories as sales reps. Well, this is my territory, this is my territory. But in a business, if there is that territorial feeling, the greater good of the whole is never really accomplished.
What's very interesting is if you look at a business, it's not how much different than it is a marriage or a home life or whatever. How often do people not fight? And what they all do is they need their own space and a time to adjust. You don't, if you have an argument, you don't go to divorce right away. You have a period where you've been done together.
Hopefully you don't.
Well, hopefully it's not that bad.
Well, I don't know about hopefully for you, Stu. I don't know if you're a divorce attorney as well, but I would say definitely any rational person wants to try to work out the kinks, because there always are kinks, whether it's in a marriage or in business or in whatever it is. And I think we can't solve the problem of the world today in terms of creating better communication, because unfortunately our world doesn't communicate very well either. And the haves and the have-nots, unfortunately, seem to always be there. But in the short time we have left, maybe we could just sort of sum up how you think your future profession will change in the next few years.
Well, it's changed so much since I started practicing law, and we had just seen the invention of the electronic typewriter. And today all the communications are electronic, and one hardly ever meets clients in person. So I would say if things continue to change at their present pace, I won't recognize the world in 10 years, the legal world.
Richard, I think you've sort of summed it up already for us in terms of communication. And I want to thank you both very much for sharing this time with me in our segment that we called Intergenerational Transition. I think we'll talk more in the future about how the youth and the professionals of today can meet on common ground. Thank you, Stu. Thank you so much for coming. Richard, thank you for coming. This is Natalie Weinstein, your host. Until next time.